Ali said, "I bet you were slow." Dean smiled. 2 seconds later, Ali threw a playful jab. Dean blocked it in 0.8 seconds. The block froze Ali in place. Nobody knew Dean Martin's hands were still that fast. Wait, because what happened after Ali saw that block and said, "Do that again," would make John Wayne stand up in the doorway. Two legends shared a moment nobody would ever forget. February 1976. The MGM Grand Hotel in Las Vegas stood like a jewel on the Strip. Its massive sign blazed against the desert night. Inside, the Ziegfeld room was emptying out. The Dean Martin celebrity roast honoring Muhammad Ali had just wrapped. 2,000 people had filled the room earlier. They watched a parade of Hollywood legends take playful shots at the greatest. The cameras had been turned off 20 minutes ago. The audience was filtering out through the carpeted corridors. They were still laughing at Don Rickles' zingers and Bob Hope's perfectly timed jabs. The waiters were clearing glasses from tables covered in white linen. The band was packing up their instruments. The magic of live television was fading into the everyday business of breaking down a set. Dean Martin sat in his dressing room. It was a converted suite on the 3rd floor of the hotel. He was loosening his bow tie. The tuxedo he wore for the roast was immaculate as always, perfectly tailored, not a wrinkle visible even after 3 hours under hot stage lights. At 58, Dean still had that effortless presence. It had made him a star for 3 decades. The dark hair was going silver now at the temples. The easy smile could charm a room without trying. He had the relaxed posture of a man who had conquered Vegas so completely that he didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. He poured himself a drink. Not the apple juice he used on stage for the drunk act. Real scotch. Good scotch. The kind you sipped slowly after a long night of work. The ice clinked against the crystal glass. That sound had become as familiar to him as applause. Outside his door, the backstage hallway was still buzzing with activity. Producers were conferring about the edit. Crew members were rolling cable. Other performers were heading to their own dressing rooms or out to the casino floor to keep the night going. Then the door opened without a knock. Muhammad Ali walked in. The champ was still in his suit from the roast. A perfectly cut three-piece that showed off the physique that had dominated boxing for more than a decade. At 34, Ali was past his absolute prime, but he was still the most famous athlete on the planet. Still the greatest in his own words, and in the minds of millions. Still the man who had beaten George Foreman in Zaire. The man who had gone toe-to-toe with Joe Frazier in Manila. The man who had changed what it meant to be a fighter and a black man in America. He had that Ali energy. That unstoppable confidence that filled whatever room he entered. "Dino," Ali said. That famous smile spreading across his face. "Good show tonight. You got some jokes in there." Dean stood. He extended his hand. "Champ, glad you enjoyed it. You were a good sport up there." They shook hands. Ali's grip was firm. The handshake of a man who had broken opponents with his fists. But he knew how to be gentle when the situation called for it. He looked around the dressing room, taking in the setup, the makeup mirror ringed with lights, the rack of tuxedos, the photographs on the wall, Dean with Frank, Dean with Sammy, Dean with Jerry back in the old days, Dean on film sets, Dean with presidents. "You know what I heard," Ali said. He settled into the leather chair across from Dean, without waiting for an invitation. "I heard you used to fight. Before all this singing and movies, they called you Kid something." Dean smiled. He settled back into his own chair. "Kid Crochet. Long time ago. Chama. Different life." "Kid Crochet," Ali repeated. He was tasting the name. "What weight?" "Welterweight. 147 pounds back then." Ali laughed. "Little man, I would have crushed you." "Without a doubt," Dean said easily. "You would have knocked me into next Tuesday. Different divisions, different divisions." different eras. But Ali wasn't letting it go. His eyes had that competitive gleam, the one that showed up whenever someone mentioned fighting, even in casual conversation. Fighting was what Ali lived for. It was in his blood, in his bones, in every word he spoke. How many fights you have? Not many. Maybe a dozen. Won most of them. Lost a few. Then I figured out I was better at singing than getting punched in the face. Smart man, Ali said. Then he leaned forward. But see, here's what I'm thinking. You got these smooth hands right. Singer hands. Piano player hands. I bet you were slow in the ring. Probably just survived because the other guys were slower. Dean's smile didn't change. Maybe so. Listen to the way Ali is setting this up. He's not being mean. He's being Ali. Testing, probing, looking for that reaction. That's what made him great in the ring. That's what made him magnetic outside it. He pushed. He prodded. He found your buttons and pressed them with a grin on his face. Show me your hands, Ali said. Dean set down his drink. He held up his hands, palms down first, then palms up. 58-year-old hands that had held microphones for 30 years. Hands that had dealt cards in illegal casinos in Steubenville when he was a teenager. Hands that had thrown punches for money in smoky fight clubs in Ohio before he had ever stepped on a stage. Ali took Dean's right hand in both of his. He examined it like a doctor. The knuckles, the fingers, the bones of the wrist. Small hands, Ali pronounced. Small hands for a welterweight. You know what that means. What does that mean, Cham? Means you were slow. Big hands, big reach, big power. Small hands. Ali shook his head. I bet you were slow, Dean. Probably got hit a lot. Dean pulled his hand back gently, still smiling. Fast enough for the guys I fought. Fast enough, Ali repeated. He was laughing. That's what they all say, till they get in the ring with me. Then they find out what fast really means. He stood up from the chair, bouncing slightly on his feet. Even in a three-piece suit, even at 34, with miles of hard fights behind him, Ali moved like water, fluid, effortless, the kind of movement that couldn't be taught, only born into. He shuffled his feet. He threw a couple of shadow punches at the air. See this? This is fast, Dino. This is fast. Dean watched, still sitting, still holding his drink. He had seen this before. The Lee being a Lee, the showman never quite turning off. The fighter always needing to prove something, even when there was nothing to prove. Then Ali turned to face him directly. You said you were fast enough. Let's see it. And before Dean could respond, Ali threw a jab. Not hard, not even really aimed at Dean's face, just a playful tap. The way you might poke a friend's shoulder to get their attention. Fast enough to be impressive, slow enough to be safe. Ali being Ali, testing the old boxer to see what he would do. Stop right here and picture what happened next. Because what happened in the next second would change the entire energy of that room. It would shift Ali from playful to serious. It would bring a ghost from 1940s Steubenville, Ohio into a 1976 Las Vegas dressing room. It would prove that some skills don't fade, even when you bury them under 30 years of tuxedos and smooth singing. Dean's left hand came up, not from thought, not from decision, from muscle memory. Muscle memory carved into his nervous system 40 years earlier, back when his name was Dino Crosetti, back when survival in the ring meant blocking punches before your conscious mind even registered them coming. 0.8 seconds, that's how long it took. Dean's left hand rose from his lap. It crossed the space between them. It intercepted Ali's jab mid-flight. He wasn't blocking the fist. He was catching the wrist. Gently, but firmly. The way you would catch a baseball someone tossed to you without warning. Ali froze. His fist was stopped in midair. Dean's fingers were wrapped around his wrist. The playful grin on Ali's face vanished. It was replaced by something else. Surprise. Genuine surprise. Muhammad Ali had fought the best fighters in the world. He had seen every combination and counter-combination imaginable, and he was surprised. Dean held the wrist for just a beat. Then he let go. He settled back into his chair. He picked up his drink as if nothing had happened. "What was that?" Ali said. "That was fast enough," Dean replied. Ali stared at him. Really looked at him now. Not at the tuxedo. Not at the smooth Vegas persona. At the man underneath. The man who had grown up in a steel town. The place where you learned to fight, or you got eaten alive. The man who had boxed for money before he had ever sung a note in public. The man who had buried that past, so deep that almost everyone had forgotten it existed. "Do that again," Ali said. "Champ, we don't need to. Do that again." This time there was no smile on Ali's face. This was the Ali who had demanded rematches, who had insisted on proving himself again and again, who couldn't let a challenge go unanswered. He stepped back, creating space. He raised his hands properly now, orthodox stance. The way he had stood in 100 rings against 100 opponents. Notice how the stakes just changed. This isn't play anymore. This is Ali's pride engaging. This is the fighter in him waking up. The part that can't accept that a 58-year-old singer in a tuxedo just blocked his jab. "Come on," Ali said. "Show me you weren't lucky." Dean set down his drink and stood up. He didn't take a fighting stance, didn't raise his hands, just stood there, relaxed, in his tuxedo, the bow tie hanging loose around his neck, waiting. Ali threw another jab, faster this time, maybe 50% of the speed he had used in actual fights, still just testing, still not trying to hurt Dean, but testing for real now, testing to see if that first block was reflex or accident. Dean's left hand rose again, same motion, same speed, same precision. He caught Ali's wrist mid-flight. This time he gave it a slight downward press, redirecting the punch away from his face, the way a boxer redirects incoming power. Then he let go and stepped back, his hands dropping to his sides. Ali stood there, his right arm still extended from the jab, staring at Dean like he was seeing a magic trick. He couldn't figure out. "How old did you say you are?" 58. "And you haven't fought in how many years?" 37, 38, somewhere around there. Ali shook his head slowly. "Man, you really were fast. Not just fast for Steubenville. Fast. Remember what you're watching. This is Muhammad Ali, the man who had fought everyone. He's giving genuine respect to a welterweight from the 1930s, a fighter who had quit before Ali was even born. That's not something Ali gave easily. He had barely respected Sonny Liston. He had trash-talked Joe Frazier, even while fighting him. But here, in this moment, Ali saw something he recognized. Speed. Real speed. The kind you're born with, and never completely lose. The door to the dressing room was still open. Neither of them had closed it when Ali walked in. And standing in the doorway now, watching the whole exchange, was John Wayne. The Duke was 70 years old, wearing a dark suit, leaning against the door frame with his arms crossed. He had been at the roast too, sitting at one of the front tables, lending his massive presence to honor Ali. He had been walking past when he heard Ali's voice. He stopped to see what was happening. Wayne didn't say anything, he just watched. And when Dean blocked that second jab, when Ali shook his head in amazement, Wayne straightened up slightly, not quite standing at full attention, but close, the posture of a man who had just seen something worth standing up for. Ali turned and saw Wayne in the doorway. "Duke, you see that?" "I saw it," Wayne said, that distinctive voice that had narrated 1,000 westerns. "He blocked me. Twice. At 58 years old." Ali turned back to Dean. "You really could have been somebody in the ring. Dean, You had the hands. You had the speed. Different era, different circumstances. You could have been a name. Dean picked up his drink again, settling back into his chair with that effortless grace, the grace that had defined his entire career. I was somebody, Cham, just in a different ring. The room went quiet for a moment, not an uncomfortable silence, a respectful one. Ali was processing what Dean had said. Wayne was still watching from the doorway. Dean was sipping his scotch, completely at ease with who he was, with who he had been, with how those two versions of himself connected. Then Ali laughed. Not the loud, performative Ali laugh he used for press conferences and television. A real laugh. Genuine appreciation. He crossed to Dean and pulled him into a hug. The kind of bear hug Ali was famous for, lifting Dean slightly off his feet, before setting him back down. You got my respect, Dino, Ali said. Not just for the singing. For those hands. Dean smiled. And you've got mine, Chammer, for being exactly who you are. Nanali headed for the door, still shaking his head. As he passed Wayne in the doorway, he pointed back at Dean. Can you believe that, Duke? Old man still got reflexes like a cat. I believe it, Wayne said. I always knew there was steel under all that smooth. And then Ali was gone, his voice carrying down the hallway as he found someone else to talk to, some other person to charm or challenge or surprise. That's who Ali was. Perpetual motion, endless energy, the kind of man who couldn't sit still because the world was too interesting. He needed to engage with all of it, all at once, all the time. Wayne stayed in the doorway for another moment, looking at Dean. You never told me you could move like that. You never asked, Dean said. Wayne smiled, a rare thing on a face that had spent 50 years playing men who didn't smile much. Kid Crochet. I'll be damned. He left too, heading back toward the elevators, back to whatever plans he had for the rest of his evening in Vegas. Dean was alone in the dressing room again, the same room he had been in 20 minutes ago, the same tuxedo, the same scotch. But something had shifted. Some ghost from his past had been acknowledged. Some part of him that he had left behind in Ohio had been seen and respected by two of the most famous men in America. He finished his drink and started getting ready to leave. There was probably a party happening somewhere in the hotel. Frank might be playing baccarat in the high roller room. Sammy might be doing an impromptu set in the lounge. But Dean thought maybe he would just head home tonight. Back to his house in the hills. Back to his quiet life. The life that the public never quite believed he lived. People thought Dean Martin was always on, always performing, always the smooth character from the variety show and the roast specials. But the truth was simpler and more complex. Dean Martin was a performance, a brilliant one, a performance so good that it had made him rich and famous and beloved. But underneath it was Dino Crosetti, the kid from Steubenville who had fought for money, who had dealt cards in illegal casinos, who had learned early that the world didn't give you anything you didn't take. That kid never went away. He just learned to wear a tuxedo and sing instead of throwing punches. The dressing room was completely quiet. Now, the sounds from the hallway had faded. The last of the crew had finished packing up and headed out. Dean looked at his hands again, the same hands Ali had examined. Small hands. Ali had said, maybe so, but fast enough. That's what mattered. Fast enough for the guys he had fought. Fast enough for the life he had built. Fast enough to block Muhammad Ali's jab 40 years after he had last stepped in a ring. He thought about something Ali had said. You could have been somebody. That's how most people would hear it. But Dean heard something else. Ali hadn't said you should have been somebody. He had said you could have. Recognition of the path not taken. Understanding that Dean had chosen something different, and that choosing differently didn't mean choosing wrong. Dean had been somebody. Was somebody, just not in the way Ali defined greatness. That's the interesting thing about legends. Meeting legends, they recognize each other across different worlds. Ali saw the fighter in Dean even under the tuxedo and the 30 years of singing. Dean saw the performer in Ali even when Ali was in the ring. They were both playing roles they had created for themselves, both brilliant at it, both comfortable enough in those roles to respect the other's version of success. 20 years later, when people would ask Dean about Ali, he would smile that Dean Martin smile. He would say the champ was special, one of a kind, and if they pressed him about whether they had ever gotten into any kind of confrontation, Dean would shake his head. Nah, we just talked. He's a talker, that Ali could talk all night. Which was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was standing in a dressing room with a man who had conquered the world with his fists, while Dean had conquered it with his voice, and finding out that respect flows both ways, when you have both fought your way to the top from nothing. The story of that night would circulate in Hollywood for years. Crew members who had been in the hallway during the roast, who had seen Ali go into Dean's dressing room, who had heard the raised voices, and then the laughter. People who had seen John Wayne standing in the doorway with that look on his face. The story would get embellished. Of course, that's what stories do. By some versions, Dean blocked 10 punches. By others, they had actually sparred for 5 minutes. But the people who were there knew the truth was simpler and better than the embellishments. Muhammad Ali tested Dean Martin's speed. Dean showed him. Ali recognized it. Wayne witnessed it. And 3 legends shared a moment of mutual respect. A moment that had nothing to do with cameras or audiences or the machinery of fame. Just men who had built something from nothing, acknowledging each other across the different paths they had taken to greatness. Dean left the MGM Grand that night, through a side exit, avoiding the casino floor where people would want to talk to him, where they would want autographs, where they would just want to be near the famous Dean Martin. He drove himself home through the desert night, the lights of Vegas fading in his rearview mirror. At home, he would pour another scotch, maybe watch some television, eventually fall asleep in his own bed, in his own house, living the quiet life that nobody who watched the Dean Martin show would ever believe he actually lived. But before he left the dressing room, he did one thing. He stood in front of the mirror, the makeup lights still on, and he threw a jab at his own reflection. Fast, clean, precise. The muscle memory still there after all these years. 0.8 seconds from rest to full extension, still fast enough. He smiled at himself in the mirror and turned off the lights. If you enjoyed spending this time here, I would be grateful if you would consider subscribing. A simple like also helps more than you think. And if you want to hear about the night Frank Sinatra tried to teach Muhammad Ali how to sing, or what happened when John Wayne challenged Sammy Davis Jr. to a quick draw contest, drop me a comment. There are more stories from that golden age than anyone remembers, and some of them are worth remembering.